Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HPL Gallery's Artist Talk series. My name is Jennifer, and I am one of the curators for the Visual Arts Exhibitions program at the Hoover Public Library. And today I am so thrilled to introduce to you artist and educator Bryce Speed. Bryce is a painter, and his work exists within the realm of abstraction, but he layers in representational imagery in this way that allows him to subtly play with the boundaries of genre. And so with that, I'll leave it there and turn it over to Bryce to further introduce himself and to share his work with us. Thank you so much for doing this today, Bryce. How are you?
I'm good. Jennifer, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful.
And thank you so much for the invite.
You're welcome.
And I appreciate you coordinating the virtual exhibition and all the work that you've put into that. It looks really great. I'm real pleased with everything.
Oh, good. I'm so happy.
I'll just jump in then, I suppose, and start talking about my work. As Jennifer said, I am a painter, and I very much think within the language of painting. When I make my work, I enter into art making, I enter into the act of painting from an emotional place, typically, with the very general idea that a painting is something that's meant to be contemplated and to maybe stir emotion or stir an idea, and not just something that is discarded as decorative. So I try to enter into painting that maybe both has a conceptual underpinning and then maybe also an emotional underpinning. And I think this is one of the things that's unique to painting itself. It's analog in its nature, and I think we're kind of driven to figure out what the marks mean, what the colors mean, what the forms suggest. As you were saying, I am interested in abstraction. Personally, I'm interested in turning personal narrative into abstraction. So my pieces typically start with some sort of experience or memory or little story that I have invented as a jumping off point. I've been drawing, painting, making art since I was about 3 years old, quite a long time. And I'm going to share my screen here with everyone, and I'll take you to my website and we'll look at some images. And these are works that are from 2019. I'll also be showing some works from this year as well, including maybe some of the ones that Jennifer, you and I looked at earlier when we did our studio visit earlier this year before the pandemic. But there's a strong drawing background to the work. I can't seem to quite get away from drawing. It's maybe less evident in the current body of work. But all of the work that I've done, basically since I've been a professional artist, has been in some part driven by the act of drawing and the process of drawing. And that has ranged from works that involve technical drawing, such as architectural drafting, diagrams and that sort of thing, to more expressive, more lyrical types of mark making. Growing up, I really didn't have a lot of examples of artists, or even, I didn't know any artists. I didn't really know what it meant to be an artist. And certainly not a lot of examples of contemporary art. But I knew innately that I really had an interest in creating things and making things with my hands. And it was almost compulsive to me as a child. I would go through reams of paper drawing things over and over and over, and just sort of productive, even as a kid artist. And I remember moments in my childhood that were very pivotal related to art, and those often involved seeing examples of modern art on TV or in the background of a show that my parents were watching. And as I got to college, I really wanted to know more about modern art, more about contemporary art. And so I kind of gravitated to artists like Seurat, Paul Klee, the abstract expressionist, and later Bay Area figurative art. And I feel like through all of those different explorations, I took little moments of that with me into my work, and I encapsulated some key lessons from those artists into the work that I subsequently went on to make. And when I found out about artists, art studios, that there were spaces dedicated just to the making of art, and that artists would go in those spaces and surround themselves with their materials, I was sort of hooked. I felt really at home at that point, and knew I confirmed what I wanted to do. And in college, I majored in art. I completed the BFA degree, and became really interested in art history. I love modern and contemporary. It has this ability to kind of draw you in a way, through material, through color, through form. And I still feel that way today, in fact. These are images that I showed at the Red Arrow Gallery in Nashville last May. And this piece is titled Twin Beacons. These are acrylic on panel. And this one's about 12 by 16 inches. My philosophy of painting is that painting is an extension of the brain and mind onto a tangible surface. That tangible surface then holds a recording of that moment in time when this painting was created, those processes, the decisions involved, the memories recounted, etc. So then this recorded still idea becomes something that someone else may see as a message or as having content, or may sort of bud up an idea that they're already having about whatever it is the subject is that I'm working with. And I try to embed that into my experience and through my unique way of storytelling. But I think there's the doing, there's the making of painting, but then there's that sort of what I call the magic transformation that happens when you make the piece and then you put it out there, and then the dialogue begins, and suddenly we're talking about the idea that I had, the thing that I made, but also the idea that someone else had, or the interpretation that someone else has. And so it becomes this rich kind of, like way of creating experience, I suppose. And this goes back, painting is such a beautiful history. I'm really inspired by the history of art and the history of painting as well. I also enjoy teaching, and I am teaching. I teach all levels of painting here at the university. I've been here now 7 years, and my studio is on campus, which you can see a little bit in the background. But I find teaching to be very enjoyable, very rewarding. I love helping students. I like being able to provide resources, shop talk, tricks of the trade, and I think the best thing that I can do as an artist is to provide a safe, creative space where students feel like that they can take risk and really explore their own ideas and question their own habits of life, which is a lot of what we do. But also as an artist, teaching to me means a type of freedom. I feel very free in the classroom in the sense that I can share what I'm doing in the studio, and that's a reciprocating relationship a lot of times. I take what I'm doing in the studio to the classroom, but also I bring back from the classroom into the studio, and that can be very rewarding as well. I think teaching is also freedom because I don't necessarily have to rely on a market system to create or to sustain my life and my work. So I'm able to explore, change, bounce from body to body of work, and work in and out of series as I like. Yeah, so I will also talk a little bit now about the materials that I use and some processes that are involved in painting, and I'll try to weave in some more of the conceptual things too. All of these works are acrylic, and all of them are acrylic on wood panels. I have worked with various materials. I've worked with basically all the painting materials, all the painting mediums, and have explored some painting in expanded form, for example. But mainly, I think the works that we'll look at today are all traditional format works. So I'm interested in layers. I'm interested in building up layers of information. And I'm also very much interested in this sort of fertile ground between abstraction and representation. I think sort of along those same lines, my work tends to hover between, well, obviously between abstraction and representation, but also between sort of light and dark in terms of the way that mood is conveyed. Maybe upon first glance, someone says, oh, well, that's, you know, that's sort of I get elements of the landscape. But I think the longer one is involved with the work, the more they might begin to see these sort of slight subversions, these sort of subverted narratives, or things that might relate to some of the problems that we're facing in terms of our own ecology and the environment here in 2020. So this piece is titled Cathedral, and this was influenced from the from the very primitive cave paintings. Initially, I was thinking of the large rooms that are found in some of the prehistoric caves that were referred to as cathedral spaces. I've always found that that idea of sort of nature and a sanctuary, or nature and a worship space, very interested. Furthermore, I've been sort of specifically driving my narratives by the following, which is things that happen in the woods. So I kind of have this long running list of both like real and some absurd things that could happen in the woods. And some of those have sort of been fodder for some of these paintings as well. But yeah, I'm really interested in probably works that lean a little bit more, lately works that lean a little bit more towards abstraction, though I'm not really sure that I've ever in my life made a piece that was completely non-objective in terms of not having some sort of subject matter base. But anyway, I think about abstraction as a way to solve problems. It's also very fruitful for this kind of material exploration that I'm interested in, and emotional experimentation, as well as things like invention. I feel very inventive when I'm relying on a thought or an idea, or even a fragment of an idea, as opposed to relying on something that is factual and that exists. such as a photograph of a place. I do work from photographs on occasion, but it's more about, I'm usually interested in one little thing from the photograph. So sometimes I do sort of do compilations. Some of these are sort of compiled kind of combinations. This is a piece called Eye in the Sky, also from that Nashville show last year. This is 16 by 20 inches. A lot of this work is created through processes that involve working on multiple pieces at one time. I often start 8, 10 paintings for a couple of reasons. One, I like that feeling of working on, I like that feeling of having several things visible to me in the studio, but also more practically, multiple pieces keep me from kind of putting too much information in one piece. I often think about my work as, an analogy I use is songs on a record or songs on an album. The idea may be central, or there may be an umbrella theme that happens in different ways in different pieces strung out over a course of time, as opposed to this tendency that I had as a younger artist to kind of throw everything, including the kitchen sink, into just one piece. So I think that this is helpful in terms of how the narratives play out over time and how the viewer ultimately ends up responding to what it is I'm trying to get them to see or think about. I think a lot of this also, so I mentioned being influenced by the landscape. I'm from Mississippi. A lot of these look like Mississippi landscapes. A lot of these might appear to be sort of derived from Alabama landscapes as well. I am really interested in this lush sort of greenness, this way that a forest or a tree or a rock or a waterfall might sort of fill in for the idea of the person. These aren't figurative. I rarely have figurative elements in them, but there's always, or a lot of times I'll say, there's an indication that a figure has been in this space, or that there's some sort of human element somewhere. Sometimes that's abstract. Sometimes that's through like little drawings. This one has what appears to be a human eye sort of floating in the sky. Might call that surreal, I suppose. So I'm also interested with this work in the idea of the inner life. And to me, that's very much tied up in our understanding of nature and how we interact in nature. And I think also fear of nature sometimes is an interesting component that ekes its way into this work as well. And I'll try to explain that a little bit. A kind of respect of the natural powers of nature. A lot of my interest in nature actually started after Hurricane Katrina. My parents went through Katrina in 2005, and that was such a scary / beautiful / all these sorts of contrasts played into those moments and those years that followed. But it really had a profound impact on me in terms of how I think about nature as an analogy, or the destructive powers of nature as an analogy, or having some sort of austere beauty to them that is ever present in a way. And so I think about how that is very powerful in terms of metaphor for one's inner life, and maybe one's identity and maybe one's sort of like existential understanding of themselves. I think these are somewhere between landscapes and abstraction. I think of them as hybrids, honestly, in many ways. I think of them being organic and synthetic, because that's really the basis of our experience, is this understanding and this trying to figure out the synthetic world and the natural world, and how all that begins to how all that exists together for us. And sometimes that exists with energy, and sometimes it exists with tension, and sometimes it's lighthearted, and sometimes it's dark and scary. And so there's just this multitude of ways of understanding nature and ways of understanding ourselves in relation to nature, that those opposing factors are often at odds with each other, but maybe sometimes they coalesce, and maybe sometimes they're able to give us something. They're able to give us something back, a kind of retreat, or a resolve with ourselves in some way. I think painting, I think of it as more than an image of something, but I think that it always represents the world, and that it poses questions. I think it's more successful when it poses questions as opposed to answers. And so I never shy away from ambiguity, or that unclarity, that those unclear moments that are at times more compelling than, maybe something that's very straightforward. This is a piece titled "The Trip." And again, thinking about these sort of ambiguous tree forms in the front, tree/figurative forms. I've always really liked those. There's a few movies. The Wizard of Oz is one of the movies where the trees come to life, and I've always thought that was so compelling. The live trees on the yellow brick road that throw the apples, and just this sort of idea of that surreal space, that blurring of sort of fantasy, landscape, abstraction, surrealism. I find those levels to be very, very interesting. And so this piece, I was thinking a little bit about trees. This is a piece that's on the cover of the website. And I sometimes enjoy working from images that I find, that I source, either that I take and abstract, or, as I mentioned earlier, maybe using like a little small fragment of a work or a photograph, a journalistic photo sometimes. For a while, I was sort of sourcing weather imagery. And there's something about that sort of step removed, stepping back from the disaster, through the photograph, then through the interpretation, then through the sketch, then through the painting, that sort of naturally holds elements of that original idea, but then also becomes something that I can manipulate, and something that I then have a little bit of more control on. So yeah, you're seeing images of rocks, abstracted water forms, abstracted tree forms. I was very interested in the drawing of water at one time, particularly water in motion, or water within the context of a storm, like a sea, and did lots of, well, they started out actually fairly representational, and then they became a lot more abstract. And this is a point where it's getting fairly abstract in this piece titled oasis. Similar piece in this one where the water becomes almost kind of a layer on top of the painted forms. The water, of course, being represented through the white lines in the drawing. Yeah, I'll sort of start to wrap up here, and I would just say that I think for me, painting is an ongoing search. It's an ongoing posing of questions and seeking answers. It's something that currently I'm interested in kind of delving into these essential truths to the work that I'm making. And I've been able to answer some of those fundamentals, and I'm still seeking some of those fundamentals. So as my life evolves and I keep figuring myself out, so to speak, I find that relationship is very closely related to my relationship with my work and my studio work. That seems to be a sort of a parallel progression. So therefore, I'm really interested in continuing to tackle those large questions. But I feel that painting, I want to create a painting that's spacious or that has the illusion of space. That's one thing that has been really consistent through my work, despite various subject matters. But I'm interested in this relationship between color and space. I know that that's probably evident in some of these paintings, but it's something that I continue to strive towards and to have even more impact. And I, of course, want all the paintings to have some sort of intention or purpose. I think when I come in the studio and I don't feel that sense of purpose, or I'm having a day where I don't think painting is important, then that really affects how I work. So I have to be really, I think I have to be really cognizant of keeping myself kind of healthy and the work stays healthy. It's a simpatico relationship, to say the least. But yeah, I enjoy this creation of atmosphere. I enjoy abstraction. I enjoy bringing in the personal narrative that then gets turned into some sort of abstraction. And for me, painting is ultimately about creating an experience. And I think I'll stop there.
Did you want to bring up your PowerPoint too and show us some of those works?
Sure.
I'd love to see those.
Yeah, let me show you some really, these are really new works. There we go. Can you see that?
Yep, there it is.
Yeah, so these are the latest works, Jennifer. These are all, I think everything on this PowerPoint, if I'm not mistaken, is from 2020, from this year. I was working on some shows that were ultimately canceled or turned into virtual exhibitions, such as the one at the Hoover Library. And while that was on a level disappointing, it was also, the pandemic has been a pretty productive time for me as well, in terms of being able to be in the studio and getting work done and making paintings. I made several, mainly because I had very few distractions. So that was a plus for me to help me get through the last 6 months or so. But as you can tell, these works, I'll talk about process a little bit more. There's similar processes to the work that you were seeing. However, what looks maybe like collage in these is actually paint. These are all paint. This piece is a pretty large 36 by 48. This is another piece kind of merging. It's simplifying the landscape in a way, seeking some more essential kind of answers in these pieces. Repetition has started playing a very important part in the work. I think because repetition seems like a very powerful tool to me to convey tension and emotion and intentionality in a way. These works have a lot more hard edges, and I think while they still reference trees and they still reference a lot of natural forms, tree trunks and natural forms, rocks, there's kind of there's a darker element coming into some of these more recent works through these sort of implied, maybe the edges have gotten a little sharper, or there's sort of these like teeth-like shapes or eye shapes, or there's the trees are falling over. There's just a little bit of despair to these, I think, that's coming in deliberately and purposefully to maybe speak to the time that we're living in and to some of the conditions that we're all faced with every day. Yeah, I'll flip through some more of these. I think this is one in the virtual exhibition at Hoover.
It's really nice to see the way that you're bringing to the foreground shape and color, but you're still existing in that space that you have, like your narrative and your imagery is the same. You've just mutated it slightly. So it's kind of fun to see that transition that you're in right now.
Well, thank you. I think one thing that I'm sort of on a research level that I'm interested in is, obviously, I think being in this space of being a painter in 2020, you're looking back we're in the early part of the 21st century, and we tend to look back and rely heavily to some degree on what came prior, those movements from the 20th century. And I find myself, and this is a very exciting place to be in, but I find myself sort of simultaneously interested in things that are very analytical and cold, and then things that are also maybe very expressionistic and gestural and very human in a lot of senses. So something that I've been kind of wrestling around with in the studio, I'll say, is where is that middle between something like concrete art and something like abstract expressionist, and then what is that blended form? What are these hybrid forms available to us here in the postmodern kind of period that we're living in? And certainly there's that appropriation, and then there's the thing that I bring to that. So really, I think when we talk about contemporary painting, we really owe it to ourselves to kind of not just take it at first glance, but to sort of see into the piece. And I don't know that that's a window relationship as it has been in the past. We look at a painting, we sort of look into the painting. I think painting can be also expanding outward in a sense, and spatially through these works and kind of intellectually through these works, I'm very much drawn to the idea that something is kind of atmospheric and including perspective, but that also may have this sort of need to jump out at the viewer in a sense, that the painting sort of projects outward as well as inward. And that goes back to that repetitive tension, that dark light, that sort of unsteady nature that I think is evident in these works as well. So. This is 18 by 24. A lot of these are 18 by 24. That's been sort of the sweet size that I found lately that has been very appealing to me. Not too big, not too large, not too small. But it certainly felt right for me over the last few months. Yep, I think that's maybe the last one.
Let me bring us to the foreground and we can say farewell. Again, Bryce, I really enjoyed this. This was so much fun. It's so nice to hear your background and your thoughts on your art making practice. You know, that's always like really exciting for me. And it's been, since I've been in Alabama, fun to kind of watch your progression and watch how you change and shift. So thanks again for doing the exhibition and for talking with us today.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry that it could not be in person, but until better times, I look forward to seeing you again and continuing our conversation sometime.
I do too. Okay, well, bye everyone, and thanks for joining us. Bye, Bryce.
Thank you. Bye-bye.